Welcome, Ken Petrella.
And good afternoon, everyone. I am indeed Ken Petrella, and I have the privilege of introducing our first panel. The last 2 years, I've been completely immersed in China business for Wells Fargo. So I feel quite privileged to do this. We have an impressive panel, but I thought I would just say a few words before that. One is that the opportunities are unlimited. In fact, 2013 was the first year that foreign direct investment from China to the United States exceeded investment by the United States in China. So clearly we're helping customers and companies in California do business in China, but the door is wide open to help Chinese companies doing business in the United States. So the opportunity is unlimited. I think the question is, where will this foreign direct investment go? Will it be in Texas, New York, Chicago, Seattle, or some other place, or can we take advantage of the history that we have with China? And I think those are some of the things we'll talk about today. As Jim mentioned, I am on the board of the advisory board of the California China Trade and Investment Office. I'm pleased to do that. I'm pleased to represent Wells Fargo Bank. We have a commitment to doing business. We have a commitment in the state, of course. And I joined Governor Brown on that trip last April. It's an exciting time. The state of California reopened that office. It had been closed for 10 years. I think I might get this wrong, but I think there are 42 other states that have offices in China. So we had a 10-year absence, but given our diversified economy and the long cultural ties we have with China, we're overcoming that very quickly. I think that what we want is have the new China Silk Road pass through California. And I hope this doesn't sound naive, but I really believe that if we can harness the opportunities to do business with China in the state of California, it can be a real advantage for the state. We can take clear advantage of all the things that are happening between our two great countries. We have an impressive panel today to talk about China, and as I think I said at the beginning, it's really appropriate that we would start this conference with China, the first panel being China. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists very briefly. I won't go into detail about their accomplishments. It's listed in the program, but when we were in the back getting ready for this, we were talking about first jobs or something that you wouldn't see on someone's CV. So as I introduce them, I will give you a little human touch of what they've done to get started. Orville Schell is the Arthur Ross Director of the Center on U.S.-China Relations at Asia Society in New York. He's a former professor and dean at the University of California, Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, and he is one of the foremost experts on China. I've been on panels with him, and we've met before. He has a lot of insightful things to say, and his first job was a short-order cook on a Norwegian freighter. Michael Korkuska is Senior Director for Product Management at LinkedIn and is leading LinkedIn's exciting expansion into China. And Michael's first job was a short-order cook in Cleveland, Ohio. Weili Dai is president and co-founder of Marvell, a global technology leader whose innovative products power everything from mobile communications to storage, cloud infrastructure, digital entertainment, and in-home content delivery. Marvell has major operations in both California and China. In fact, I don't think you can drive in Shanghai without seeing the big Marvell name on everywhere. What's interesting about Weili is that she was a semi-professional basketball player and represented the state team in China. Is that correct? Welcome. Steve Wesley is the former controller and CFO for the state of California and a managing partner at Wesley Group, which is a venture capital firm. He has some impressive wins, and I think he's someone you want to listen to. He's been very successful. I've introduced him after Wei Li because what I learned when we were talking about Wei Li's basketball abilities, that he purports to be a good athlete, but he's never beaten Wei Li on one-on-one in basketball. And lastly, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's discussions. It's John Myers. John is a senior editor for KQED and one of California's top political journalists. I've asked him if he could tell me something different about his background or he got started. He said, I'm a journalist. My first job was a busboy. So thank you all very much. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Had far more respect as a busboy than as a political journalist, but that's for another time. Thank you very much. Thank you. We've got a wonderful panel here to talk to you. You're trying to figure out why a political reporter is here to talk about China. I suspect part of it's because I was with the governor on that trip last year, where I think it raised a lot of fascinating issues about the relationship between California and China, and I think we're going to talk about a lot of those. But I want to start off because I've been told to give you something to weigh in on before our experts start weighing in. And so I think on your screen you're going to see a question that you are to give us an answer with a text. I think that's right. So let me tell you what the question is while we're getting it up there on the screen. The question is, what is your company's outlook on doing business in China? And your choices are, 1, we're already there, planning more growth. 2 is, we're already there, but we don't see any new potential. Choice 3 is, we're not there, but we plan to be. Option 4 is, no plan to go, not there, why are you asking me? You're not picking number 4, right? So those are the choices I think you'll see up here on the screen in a little while, and they're going to give you a way to text in and answer that question. And if it's a little bit behind on that, we'll come back to that so that you can weigh in, and we'll kind of see in real time your own optimism about the relationship that you see your business having potentially with China. But obviously we've got a great panel here to talk a little bit about their perspective on things. And I thought what we should do is probably open with a quick question for each of them, and then we'll kind of mix and match a little bit as we go along to have this discussion. But I was hoping if each of you could start in a very brief time, a little 30-second answer, almost a lightning round, as we call in political world, of your greatest hopes and maybe your fears about the coming wave of Chinese investment in California. And since you're so close to me, Steve Wesley, what do you see as both the two sides of this coin, the greatest hopes, greatest fears about that Chinese investment here?
Well, I think 2 things. One, I want to see open trading both ways. What we're seeing a lot of now, China making a lot of investments here, but it's tricky to invest the other way. So I'm really hoping to see more of an open environment. Just one thing to think about, I used to serve as a fiduciary on California's pension funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS. Together, they invest about $1/3 trillion. The CIC, the China Investment Corp, invests a magnitude more than that. They're looking to invest more in the United States. I think that is a good thing. This is the most important relationship on the planet. The more we can invest both ways, the safer and better world we will have.
Wei Li, if I could ask you, what do you see as the biggest hope and maybe the concern you have?
Sure. I mean, if you look at California, overall, U.S. is a united, I call it nations, from people from around the world, and especially in California, it's a lot of local talent in our country as well as overseas. So having China invest in California, specifically also Silicon Valley, I think it's good for both countries. And of course, the concern I have is the competitiveness. And there's a lot of greatness and talent, innovation happen here. How do we make sure that we continue to drive the leadership? And a lot of know-how. So it's a wise investment, I see.
Orville Schell, I know your expertise on China. I know there were several of us on the trade mission reading your stuff to try to catch up to know what we were supposed to be talking about in China. Where do you see this relationship now? Both great opportunities and things to look for.
Well, I think we are sitting at a rather extraordinary inflection point where It used to be, we went to China, we invested to China. That tidal flow is being reversed, and in a very dynamic and dramatic way. And that's good, because I think it will help cure one of the real problems between our two countries, which is a certain imputation of inequality. My biggest fear actually has nothing to do with trade, but trade and business always sit in the context of larger world issues. My fear is that China's nationalism, as we see being expressed with its, the row with Vietnam over the oil rig that they're trying to put in place in the South China Sea, the Philippines with Japan, that this will just spiral out of control and sabotage all of these other great plans, which I think, if cultivated in a sensible way, will bear good fruit.
Michael Korkuska, we're going to talk in a little while, I think, maybe a little more specifically about your company and its experiences. But as you step back and look at the playing field as it is now, what do you see as those opportunities and concerns?
Well, I think the increase in collaboration with companies and individuals over the last, it's markedly different even over the last 5 years in terms of the volume and quality is really positive. And my hope would be that the increased Chinese investment in the US and California will, echoing Steve, help kind of level the playing field for Western entrepreneurs trying to succeed in China as well.
As a bit of a way to kind of take an overview look here, Orville Schell, if I could ask you to maybe give us a sense of the broad look at the investment you've been seeing. You working a lot with the group known as the Rhodium Group that does a lot of this investment, Chinese investment in California and across the U.S. What do you see as maybe as the table setter here for this investment as we sit here today?
Well, I think when we as Americans go to China, we're very easily impressed by the incredible skylines, the new infrastructure, this country that has such immense new energy. And I think it's very easy to forget that actually, although China is an old country, this part of its reinvention is relatively new. And there isn't as deep a level of confidence, I think, when big companies come here as we might sometimes imagine. I think this relationship in terms of cross-investing needs a lot of help, a lot of cultivation, and I think that's the challenge for the state of California, to understand that to have it intersect in a very constructive way, it takes more than it does when you're dealing with the British or the French or the Canadians.
Do you believe, just as a quick follow-up before we move on, do you believe you see that connection or that understanding at the government level in California? We were speaking a little bit before we got out here about Governor Brown, of course, the trade mission last year. You know Governor Brown well from your look at him. But his administration and just the state of California, do they understand that relationship as well as they need to? You probably would say they need more, but...
I think they're coming to it. I think the Bay Area Council has played a very helpful role in sort of facilitating a greater connection. And I think Governor Brown's notion, a very sage one in my view, that California needs to act more like a country, because our own country isn't acting very much like a country. And so in a certain sense, this means that the burden of a kind of interaction with foreign lands drops down to the subnational level. And I think there's a very positive, constructive role for the state to play here, because when the state acts, it doesn't drag with it Taiwan, South China Sea, all of these other issues that Washington and the State Department has to deal with.
Let's talk a little bit about some particular areas that we're seeing movement in and the challenges there. Steve, if you would talk a little about clean tech investment, something you spend a lot of time talking about, that clean tech investment and where it stands now with California and China and that relationship.
Well, first, you're seeing a boom in clean technology companies now. In the early days, there were some missteps and backfires, and the Chinese dropped the price out of solar. A lot of firms didn't make it. But now you're seeing a boom. You're seeing firms like Tesla with huge IPOs, now half the market cap of General Motors, Solar City, this last week, last few months, Nest and Google. So this space is booming. It's booming in China. And I've got just one quick slide, if they can show it. It's something that all of you should give some thought to, if you can pull that slide up. But there's a level of pollution in China today that's hard to imagine as an American. And what I wanted to give you a sense of is not just this picture, but that what it means. And the subtext here, which you can read, is the Harvard Health Project projects that 83 million people will die in China because of lung-related diseases over the next 25 years. This is a stunning thing. And what it means is, as big as a problem as this is for the Chinese government, they're making it a national imperative to bring more clean technologies to market. So what I wanted to suggest to you is you're not only going to see a clean tech revolution in this country, you're going to see one in China. There is a unique opportunity for both countries to help each other, and I think we will.
And just to follow on that, I mean, when we were in China with the governor, we certainly saw the pollution firsthand. We got lucky in Beijing. We had a storm blowout. Those of you who were here, it was clean. It was unbelievable. And then we got to Guangzhou and Shanghai, and things were different. But one of the things we heard on that trip a lot was that Chinese officials wanted to know like how we'd cleaned up our smog in LA and all these other kind of things. And so there's a wealth of information and business potential in California.
China is following the exact same path we did in the 70s. We had rivers like the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland catch on fire and then burn for 2 straight weeks. We've had pollution that you can't imagine. Los Angeles, the most polluted city in the country. But we got together, we did smart things, government and the private sector together, catalytic converter legislation, pollution controls. I think China will follow our lead. We have an opportunity to help them, and both countries have an opportunity to build great companies and employ a lot of people in the process. That's good news for both of us.
So maybe we'll talk a little about brass tacks here, about business experiences and how you do what you got to do. Wei Li, if I could ask you, talk a little about operating a business in China versus in California. I mean, what's easier in each place and what's harder?
Well, first of all, I think my company, we're very fortunate. We're a global operation. We have, in fact, R&D centers over half dozen in Europe, half dozen in Asia. Of course, US is the biggest, China's second largest, and Israel being the third for my company. I think today, in today's world, everything's globalized, and you need to, whoever, whether or not business, government, just overall, anything we do, if we understand how to drive the globalization, at the same time, of course, optimize for localization. So no difference for business. So if you look at China, bunch of talents and great engineers, so it was much easier for us to pick up talents and with reasonable, cost-effective as well. If you look at it in California, well, this is the beautiful California, the innovation center, especially Silicon Valley, Bay Area, within the 50 miles radius, you have all the way from the top talents from our country, talents from overseas, top universities like Berkeley, Stanford, and other universities in the area, research centers, VCs, high-tech companies, all in one. So if we combine all the strength and for different locations, and plus China and US are 2 most powerful countries, and this is how business like us, a global operation, and really benefit in a big way.
And I mean, a very practical discussion here, Michael, is LinkedIn. Talk a little bit about how that process has gone, building a presence in China for the company, and then the Chinese can use LinkedIn to come into California.
Yeah, so you'll see the slide up here. LinkedIn's mission is to connect the world's professionals. So a large chunk of those are in China. In fact, we estimate probably 20% of the remaining people in the world not on LinkedIn live in mainland China. So it's clearly a keen focus for us. We're pretty aware of the failures of other American consumer internet companies entering China. There's a long list of at least skin knees, if not larger injuries. And so we've partnered with CBC Capital and Sequoia Capital in China to form a joint venture there that we're trying to give more independence to do things in a local way while recognizing that one of our strengths is the global population. So hopefully we can use our strength in the West to offer opportunities to Western companies interested in entering China, as well as to Chinese individuals who are interested in working outside of the PRC and making those connections. So, one
of the particular challenges you all had was this request about censoring information. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is there a lesson to take out of that a little bit? Has that happened in any other locations? And
Do you want to answer that, Orville?
well, this is the reporter in me now, so I'm going right for the meat here.
So let me be clear. We're not censoring any content in China. We know that eventually a social network like LinkedIn will be subject to Chinese regulations. We're not yet. We don't have a license there, and we have a couple of advantages on that front. First of all, you're not anonymous on LinkedIn. You're supposed to use your real identity. And the business quite frankly, we're a little bit boring. So I think we have a good chance on that front and are working to build good relationships with the government there. At the end of the day, it's about creating economic opportunity for individuals. And we feel like our presence there can help our members in the West and help Chinese make better lives for themselves and their families by finding better economic opportunities. So we think that positive value really is going to be what makes the difference for us as compared to some of the folks who have preceded us into China.
So please, Orville.
One thought, if I may, on that. One fear I do have is that we have had the World Wide Web. We've had a global internet. It could be that we are at a moment where we are going to begin to see this global communication system begin to break down in a kind of a feudal way. And in this sense, I think China and now Russia are sort of pioneering that eventuality. I would say let's check back in a year and see what's happening. The US is starting to abdicate some responsibility for being the manager of addresses, domain names, things like that. We could be headed in a very strange direction in terms of the internet.
Let me take the counterpoint to what Orville said. And I completely agree that the biggest fear that I think all of us should have, here and in China, is that, frankly, either country elects a nationalist leader that really starts to poke the other. We all have a responsibility to avoid that. I think the good news in the equation is that there is this new generation of people, we call them millennials, that we laugh about, and maybe they don't have the same work habits we do, but they're an enormous burgeoning political force, not just here, but in places like China and around the world. I think it's going to be increasingly hard for the Chinese government, the Iranian government, the Russian government, anybody to continually deny internet access. It is very hard to put the genie back in this bottle, and as this group becomes bigger, I think there will be increasing pressure on these governments to open up. It is very hard in this day and age with this level of technology to suppress the internet and openness. I just want to throw out to you, my wife's Chinese, she grew up in China, we spent a lot of time with my mother-in-law and so on. What you have to understand is for literally 5,000 generations, you are very much like your ancestors in China. Today, for the first time in ever, you may well have, as an 18 or 19-year-old, more in common with a young kid in Palo Alto, New York, Buenos Aires, or Moscow than you do with anybody in your family tree. It is a whole new world out there, and I, for one, think it's probably a good thing.
Well, on the subject of a whole new world, clearly one of the big questions is why Chinese investors should invest in California. And so one of the discussions we were having the other day was what your tweet would be, since we're going to use the Twitter model here. What would your tweet be to Xi Jinping and Chinese investors? Or what would your simple phrase, we don't make you 140 characters here, but what would your simple phrase be about why they should come to California? Wei Li, maybe I begin with you.
Well, it's the best innovation center if I look at in my industry, and this is where the know-how, the real action, and the Golden State as well.
Michael, how about you?
Well, I think that's the obvious and correct one, which is the Bay Area is still the most open and innovative place in the world.
Orville or Steve?
I'd say come to the promised land, and we're willing to help.
Now, see, he really is thinking Twitter there. He figured that whole thing out. That was 139 characters. He had one left. Exclamation point. Steve?
Look, I'd say, first, we're the world's 8th largest economy. You got to be here for starters. But what's a lot more important than that, we're inventing the future here. San Jose, by the way, is smack in the middle of it. You've got to be here to understand the future. And China's coming here increasingly.
I want to ask a little, if I could here, to talk about some specific things that you all have seen with companies and this relationship. Mindful, of course, that anecdotes aren't necessarily indicative of a larger evidence. But if we could talk about, I mean, anybody have a particular success story that stands out? And we'll talk about maybe the less than successful part in a moment. But does anyone have a particular success story that might stand out about this relationship of a Chinese company that succeeded in coming to California?
You're looking at me, right?
I'm looking down the road, but
Okay,
yes,
okay.
well, please.
Well, I can, in my case, as an example of you're talking about smart object, we all talk about smart lifestyle. So each of us, very soon will become smart object. Smartphone, you have every day. Very soon you'll have wearable, so it tracks everything you do and everything, operate life, business, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is, for a person born in Shanghai, China, coming here, and I think my story is a good example of what can impact, right? The collaboration, whether or not it's immigration, whether or not collaboration for business, whether or not it's education. So I think it's a very good thing, a lot of opportunities. If you talk about specific company, I can use my company example, even though we founded it here in Silicon Valley, but it was quite naturally to scale to have operations in China.
So I mean, I'm not sure I have a specific example of a Chinese internet company, which is a sector I know best, coming here to succeed, but I do think there are some to look out for. So first of all, one of the things, I travel to China every couple of months, and it's no longer copycats in the internet and software space. There is real innovation happening in the internet companies there, and the numbers are eye-popping. If you haven't read the Alibaba S1 and looked at some of their numbers, it's pretty impressive, some of the stuff they've done. I'll pick out one product, one division from Tencent, which is a $120 billion market cap company, product called WeChat. Any WeChat users out there, raise your hands? No? Only a few. Really innovative mobile messaging, kind of a combination of Facebook and Twitter. 0 to 500 million users in 3 years. I'll say that again, 0 to 500 million users in 3 years. Those guys know what they're doing, and that's a space that's still open and being contested in the US. I'd watch out for them.
You mentioned Alibaba, and I wanted to talk about that. Anybody else have any thoughts there? I mean, is that the beginning of something big? Is that a specific isolated case, or what do you make of that development?
Yeah, I think there's a tale of two cities. I think, looking backward 20 years, a lot of the firms that came here from China weren't quite ready for prime time. And I think about BYD, which is a battery firm that tried to morph into being an electric bus maker, and they had articulated buses. I know one of them came here in a very public way in a trial at one of our big cities, and the bus went around the corner and didn't quite articulate. It just came apart. And you just can't do that sort of thing in the U.S. You need to be ready for prime time. You need to be much more careful about your brand here. But that's the old world. What you said is exactly right. We're now seeing huge global companies. Alibaba is a $200 billion company, and it really shows that China can build companies that are on a magnitude of Apple and Google and are ready to go global. So I think this is going to be a Chinese century, and you're going to see great companies, and they're going to start to come here more often. The laundry list of big successes to date has been small, but going forward, it's going to be big. The U.S. is going to have to raise the bar to compete.
Wei Li, I want to ask you if I could. It seems that when you hear people talk about the level of trade and investment, there's this discussion of a wave. And is it a short wave, a long wave? Is it a single wave? I'm thinking surfing now, so bear with me. There are multiple sets coming in. But how sustainable do you think that wave is in trade and investment, and where do you think we might be on it?
Well, speaking of wave, I think this is just the beginning of the wave. How sustainable? It's probably is a little tough. Right? I mean, if you think about it,
Why is that?
Because if you think about, for our country, having all these exchange, investment, trading, have China invest, but at the end of the day, our country has to focus on long-term success, invest in private sectors, business research, and I think I look at the government, not that I'm a technology person, but if you think about Chinese government, and only in the last, I would say, about 10 years, start to kind of the doors open and a lot of activities, but the government itself has been always very much business and innovation kind of focused, right? And of course, education. If you look at our government, you got Democrat and Republican. There's a lot of exciting dialogues and you might call fights going on. But I think we have a great country, great foundation. We are still #1 in the world. But in order to continue to be the leader, and I think the world is flat, Earth is flat, so competition is getting tougher. So we need to really focusing on what China is doing and other countries and deal with the real business. I think that's why I think.
And if I could just follow on that, when you say look at what China's doing, focus on what China's doing, where do you think that focus should be? Like, what should we be focusing on?
I think in our country, if you think about research, for example, I always thinking about this Bell Labs. Many years ago, I had a summer job at Bell Labs. Think about today's a lot of invention, innovation, ideas, technology. It really came out of the many years, decades of Bell Labs, long-term research. So these type of scale really advance our country to be where we are today. So these type of area, I think you need to continue. Education is so important. I think that's the foundation. This is where our country needs to really lift the bar, right? And business to support the private sectors and focusing on driving the business, and that's also important. So that's what I was referring to.
And of course, while we talk about California as though we are a nation state, we are still a state, part of the United States of America. There might be 6 of us at one point, but that's another subject. Sorry. Maybe he's in the audience. But Orville, could I ask you, when you step back and look at the relationship between the nations and the trade relationship, where is that at this point? You expressed some concerns that nationally we're not doing enough in the relationship, maybe that a state like California takes the lead, but give us a little bit of a sense of where that relationship is at this point.
Well, I think we're at the very early stages of the second act, where the trade and the investment begins to come this way as well as going that way. And I think there's been a presumption in China that somehow the U.S. isn't really open to Chinese investment. This is because of a few deals that didn't work out, the CNOOC deal way back when, and the questions like Huawei and ZTE and companies like that. So I think there's a certain, in reality, there's only a single ground that our country, which has always profited by being open to foreign investment, can turn down a foreign investment, and that is a national security consideration. You can't do it for protectionist reasons. This is only in mergers and acquisitions, not in greenfield development. And so it's a very narrow basis. And actually, the committee in Washington that has judged this has done it very fairly. But the presumption in China is quite otherwise. So this means I think there's a good deal of remedial work that needs to be done to make Chinese investment feel welcome here. And I think it will be to the benefit of this country. It always has been.
Steve, you want to say something?
I think we all need to recognize foreign direct investment in our country is a good thing. 100 years ago, it was very upsetting. There was a lot of, imagine this, English foreign investment in the U.S. God help us. But it provided a lot of jobs. 30 years ago, we were all exercised too much Japanese investment in the U.S. Now people kind of appreciate those jobs at Sony and Toyota. They are good paying jobs. Now we're all worried about Chinese direct investment. And the fact is, other than maybe some highly sensitive technology companies or defense-related companies, the Chinese, we will be beneficiaries if the Chinese invest more here. It not only makes our countries closer, it's good for our economy, and the same thing needs to happen more the other direction.
So what industries are hot, and how are Chinese investors finding it in California? Is it through venture capital? Is it through family connections? I mean, what's hot? What's happening now? What's the tip for the audience?
Well, real estate is big. But of course, the big deals will be, they'll come two ways. Either Chinese companies will set up their own brand names here and their own offices here, or they'll buy our own companies, as in Smithfield Ham. Big purchase, $3.7 billion. So this is going to happen. And the question is, can we make it happen rapidly, or are we going to prevent it from happening? And the Chinese have some things they need to do too. They need to be much more transparent about their governance. And it isn't just there's a prejudice here. There's a lot of management issues that need to be straightened out in China before a company can come here and be successful.
I think a lot of Chinese companies are going to come, invest in our firms, and I think they may make some of them more efficient. Conversely, we're taking firms. I used to serve on the board at Tesla for 3 years. Tesla is just about to enter into the Chinese market. I think it's going to be a huge success. That is the future. We cannot put our heads in the sand and hope it goes away. We need to embrace it and make sure we're not only good at it, but that we're the best at it.
Michael, any thoughts there?
I just maybe come back to something Wei said. The mutual investment and the speed of that is going to increase the kind of change in the economy and what kind of jobs are available and what aren't. And one thing we can do as California at the state level is really invest in education and job training to make sure that the advantages that we've had here in California in terms of the affordable higher education system that really created, I think, the base of what is innovation in California, that we continue to do that. Maybe double down on those kind of bets so that we're ready for whatever rapid change the future brings.
So as we kind of come to the home stretch here of this discussion, I want to ask them all again, but I'm not sure we ever got the poll question up on there, so I'm going to do the old school show of hands. How many of you would you say your companies are planning growth in China or already there? Have an interest in China? This is the everybody but the last option.
There's your poll.
There's a sea of hands. There's your poll. Oh, there's the poll. Oh, yeah, good. Thank you. There it is. So already there, planning growth. That's a lot of you. Not seeing new potential, just a small sliver. Not there yet, but planning to be 12%. And you no way, no how. This is a great lunch. I love the chicken. 21% there. It's interesting because, I mean, as you see there, you've got a wide swath of people who clearly the topics that we're talking about apply to. And so I guess as we get towards the end here, let me ask each of you, what advice would you give a Chinese investor coming to California? What advice would you tell them before they come here? Either they need to know or where they need to go or whose business card to pick up. But anyone may jump in. What would you give them?
Call Steve Wesley.
Call Steve.
We are reinventing the global economy right here. For Chinese entrepreneurs, this is the best place on the planet to be. You need to have an R&D center, a sales center. Come here now. Second thing I tell them, you probably need to hire some Americans that can help you with the regulatory issues, the government issues, the sales issues, the marketing issues. Third thing is, get Wei Li's card. This woman's on fire.
It's the Mutual Admiration Society here. Since he referenced you, Wei Li, what advice for Chinese investors in California?
Well, I think Silicon Valley, this area, one is the globalization. I want to just point it out. The earth is flat. In order to succeed, whether or not in China originally or US or other countries, you have to be thoughtful of how to address the globalization. And I'll give you an example. Today, of course, my company drives the 4G LTE technology, and it started late last year from China Mobile of the world, right, for example. But the technology you develop for the world's largest operator in China called China Mobile, but the technology is really suitable for global modes. So which means is in the ecosystem, today we develop technology, for example, for the smartphone, and works globally. And what's important is if you start from China, my experience is not only you have to have a leading technology has to work, and at the same time you also go through, I call the discipline training, be cost effective. Imagine in the ecosystem of OEMs who launch the China Mobile 4G phone, and guess what? They automatically getting ready in a good position to address the global operators. So what I'm saying is, it is a global opportunity. Whether or not you are studied from China or US, you have to think from global aspect. But be thoughtful and optimize for localization. Same thing for national security. We have to be very thoughtful of each country has its own national security, but that's only a few percentage of the overall so-called the global pipe of internet access data, right?
Yeah. Let me get two thoughts here from Michael Korkuska and Orville Schell. Michael first.
This is an easy one. First thing, you're coming to California, you got to get on LinkedIn and figure out, get your employees on LinkedIn and make sure that they know how to use the website. It's actually, I mean, it's self-serving comment, but serious, actually. Learning what the ecosystem is here for doing business is very important. And I would say don't underestimate or overestimate the cultural issues. There's a lot more similarities in the big city Chinese business culture than you might think with folks here in Silicon Valley, but there are still serious management and cultural differences that you need to be very careful about if you're going to try to operate and not just invest in California or anywhere in the US.
And Orville Schell, the last word.
I think you're precisely right. I think,
About the LinkedIn thing, you mean?
well, that too. I think one needs good advice because working here is not like working in China. You need to understand about the community, you need to understand about civil society, you need to understand what philanthropy does and the role it plays. You need to understand how a corporation has to sort of work within the larger ecology of the community in which they invest. And that is not something that comes as naturally, I think, to Chinese who've grown up doing business on the other side.
An interesting conversation all around. Orville Schell, Michael Korkuska, Weili Dai, Steve Wesley. Thank you.